Every now and again, a game comes along and sets a new standard for what's possible within the FPS genre. Red Faction was the first game to feature destructible environments. Far Cry was one of the first games to have dynamic AI. And more recently, Cyberpunk set the bar for graphical fidelity. Now, all of these games happen to also feature solid gameplay. However, these advancements are a big part of what's kept them relevant years after their release. However, there's one game that is often forgotten on any of these lists, despite being one of, if not the most innovative shooter of the 90s. That game is Trespasser. Welcome, my name's Azadash and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. Ever since I was a young child, I've always been a fan of dinosaurs. In fact, when I was a young child, and long before I was actually old enough to watch the movie or read the book, I actually believed that Jurassic Park was a real place you could visit. Now, when I was a little bit older, I naturally was pretty disappointed to find out that it wasn't real, but equally excited to be able to finally watch the movie. And what a movie it was. Jurassic Park would easily be in my top 10 movies of all time. The story, the acting, the cinematography, not to mention the special effects, were all incredible. At the time of making this video, there have been 6 Jurassic movies, 3 based on the Jurassic Park theme and 3 based on the Jurassic World theme. For me, the first movie in each trilogy, Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, are far better movies than those that followed after, with some of them featuring plot developments which range from questionable to simply absurd. And while Jurassic Park doesn't feature as many large action set pieces as the other movies, it does do a great job of exploring more of the backstory, scientific explanation, and character development than all of the other movies put together. Now, when you think of dinosaur video games, the first one likely to come to mind is Turok, and with good reason. Turok wasn't just the first 3D dinosaur shooter, but it was also a pretty good game, which led to several follow-up games. But there was another 3D dinosaur shooter, Trespasser, which released just a year later in 1998, which wasn't just inspired by Jurassic Park, but actually based on it, marketing itself as a direct tie-in game. While I didn't learn about Trespasser until several years after it had released, I wouldn't have been able to play it upon release anyway, with the minimum system requirements calling for a Pentium 166 MMX with 32 megabytes of RAM and a 3D card, a long way away from my trusty 4860X66 of the time. Now, while the game isn't available for digital sale today, boxed copies are still available on most auction sites, with an unofficial patch called Trespasser CE enabling the game to run on most modern PCs, as well as uplifting the game's original presentation to widescreen. This is the version we're playing today, and I'll drop a link to the patch in the video description. As far as the story goes, Trespasser tells somewhat of a continuation of Jurassic Park's story. The player assumes the role of Anne, a young woman who plans to holiday to Costa Rica and then accidentally crashes in Isla Sorna, the island also known as Site B, which was where all of the scientific research for Jurassic Park took place. Anne then has to explore the island, solve a variety of puzzles, and wipe out most of the dinosaur population with the ultimate goal of finding a way to escape. The premise is pretty interesting, and despite Anne not really being introduced properly, with a 30-second clip serving as both the introduction to Anne and the actual plane crash that strands her on the island, her narration throughout the game does add a bit more depth to the character and explains a little bit more about her.
It's like that Twilight Zone episode where he's in this town with no people, and the guy's really an astronaut.
And it's not just Anne's narration throughout the game, as during various moments of traversal throughout the game world, Jurassic Park's creator, John Hammond, will also chime in and tell somewhat of a flashback story.
Carving up out to the southern basin, the Atherton Causeway would bring visiting scientists north from the southern beach.
As a big fan of the movie, I enjoyed this, but I do feel that its delivery mechanism could have been done better. I mean, the game doesn't include a traditional HUD in the name of immersion, and then just randomly plays John Hammond exposition at points. I think that some type of diary or recording system could have shared the same narration, alas in a more immersive gameplay experience. Regardless though, the original actor Richard Attenborough did return for these voiceovers, and this does make a big difference to the overall presentation of them. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's swipe some access cards, shoot some raptors, and head back to 1998 to remember Trespasser. Trespasser was a highly ambitious game with many gameplay systems and mechanics that just never had been seen before in a retail game release. Unfortunately, while many of these new ideas are novel in their approach, their execution is often questionable and poorly tuned for a video game experience. At the center of all these new ideas is camera and control, and to be fair, this is where I think most of the game's challenges come from. Firstly, the game ditches the idea of a traditional HUD listing health and ammo, and instead opts for something quite a bit more immersive, with the player having a tattoo which changes color depending on how much damage they've taken. Likewise, in place of an ammo count, the player calls out how much ammo they have remaining in each weapon.
Looks like 20.
Now, these systems all work fine and serve their purpose well. However, as a result of not having a HUD or traditional inventory system as such, the player is limited in what they can carry, which is one item that they can put on their belt and one item that they can carry in their hand. Apart from the fact that Anne walks around single-handing a shotgun, the real issue is that there are puzzles which require keycards which consume a slot on either your belt or your hand, meaning you will often need to drop a weapon, something the game is not overly generous in providing, to be able to put a keycard on your belt to solve a puzzle, with it often being impractical to return later to pick up the dropped weapon. Whichever way you look at it, forcing the player to drop a weapon in a survival game to pick up a 2-inch flat keycard in its place just isn't a good experience. The other issue the game faces with the removal of the HUD or a more detailed inventory system is navigation. Early in the adventure, the levels, to the developer's credit, are huge and often loop around on one another, with the way forward not always being overly clear. I think a compass or map of some description might have been a good addition to help keep players on the right track without hand-holding them. Alas, with no real place to store either of these things, it's something that just isn't here. Control is, in one word, dire. I get the idea that what started out as designing a realistic control system ended up as something which is just not predictable, reliable, or fun to actually use. The usual suspects of WASD controls are here, with a notable absence of the ability to run. That's right, if you're being chased by a dinosaur, the fastest speed you can move away at is a leisurely walk. To be fair, I think this might have actually been limited due to the game's engine and its ability to load in textures, as there is extensive pop in here. However, it doesn't make it any less frustrating. Although based on my very imprecise testing, you do move slightly faster when jumping forward, so if you don't mind inducing motion sickness, this could be an option. Like I mentioned earlier, Anne has the ability to hold something in her hand, which can be picked up by using the mouse to position her arm, often with hilarious results, and selecting the grab command. Once Anne has the item in her hand, she can then move the item around, useful for security passes, drop it, throw it, or if it's a firearm, fire it. Now, I said you can drop the item. Unfortunately, sometimes you'll drop the item without actually intending to. As if there is a collision between the level geometry or an enemy and whatever's in your hand, it will be dropped. I kind of get the enemy bit, like I can see how that's a fair penalty if a dinosaur attacks you. However, having things drop from your hand as you navigate this sometimes quite tight environment just isn't good and really gets old after the 20th time it happens. Without a doubt though, the biggest problem Control has is in its jumping mechanic, which so often fights against the game's physics and level design. In most games, the character model geometry is often a giant rectangle, which, while not being exactly realistic, does allow the player to go up to a surface in an environment and jump onto it. In Trespasser, it feels like the player's model is closer to that of a trapezoid. What this means is that if you approach something close to jump up, you can't. You need to kind of stand back a bit and then jump while moving forward. For most of the adventure, this is frustrating but manageable. However, there are points in the game where it is borderline game breaking. There's a section fairly early on in the adventure where you find what looks to be some type of ancient ruins or rock formation. And when I saw this, I assumed you needed to climb up to progress to the next section. Only after climbing to the top, I couldn't actually make the last jump to progress to the next area. I spent so long trying to navigate this area to the extent that I actually assumed at one point that you were not meant to climb it and progress another way, only to find after an exhaustive search, no other way to proceed. There's a hint system in the game, and I use the word hint fairly loosely, as in this situation, it simply told me to keep going and that I could do this. And look, I eventually did. After returning to it and trying again and again, I found an area of the structure where I was able to kind of wedge jump myself into and then repeatedly press the jump key to kind of shimmy forward and pass the area. I genuinely struggle to understand how this passed playtesting, as you need to borderline break the game's own physics system to actually succeed here. The other equally frustrating jump mechanic comes from when you need to solve one of the game's many crate puzzles. Now, throughout the game, there are sections where you will find several crates on the ground that you'll need to move and stack to be able to jump onto in order to progress. The problem is that because of the requirement to jump forward, a lot of the time you will accidentally knock over the stack of crates, making it often an exercise in frustration as opposed to one in logic. What makes this even worse is that at times the problem is compounded by the inventory system requirement of only being able to hold 2 items, one of which in your hand. There's a section in the game where you need to take 2 items to an upstairs location in a house by positioning crates to replace a damaged set of stairs. The problem is, because you can't put 2 items on your belt, you need to always be holding one, which means your arm needs to be extended. The problem is that your arm also serves as something that can collide with the game world and impact the physics, making it very challenging to be able to climb the crates you stack without knocking them over. And in perhaps the most frustrating moment of the entire game for me, the first time I was actually able to climb the crates with the keycard in hand, my hand collided with a wall when I reached the top and caused the keycard to drop from my hand and fall back down the stairs, requiring me to restart the entire sequence. I would like to be able to say that these examples are extreme cases, but they're not. They're just 2 scenarios that come to mind when I was thinking about Control, with many more occurring throughout the game's roughly 6-hour adventure. A playtime that honestly would have probably taken me less than 4 if not for some of these issues. Closely tied to Control is combat, and look, there are good things here, but equally some very questionable game design decisions. The only enemies you'll be fighting in Trespasser are dinosaurs, and each dinosaur has, for the time, quite advanced AI. Some are aggressive, while others are passive. Some will pursue you relentlessly, while others will lose interest. This is all really well done, and far beyond anything else we had ever seen around AI behaviour at the time. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the actual gunplay. The actual selection of weapons is quite good. Throughout your adventure, you'll pick up quite a variety of weapons, ranging from pistols to rifles to a tranquilizer gun, which hilariously just seems to freeze the dinosaur in place. Unfortunately, the hitbox and damage implementation is far from ideal. Sometimes a raptor will take 2 bullets to take down, and other times it'll take more than 5, with sometimes bullets seemingly doing no damage when fired from a particular angle. The other issue is that it's not possible to reload any weapon in the game. You just need to be on the hunt for new weapons to pick up. This can be pretty annoying when you have a weapon with half a clip remaining and are forced to drop it to pick up the exact same weapon just because it has a full clip. This is made even worse by the fact that weapons do not carry over between levels, which honestly feels at odds with the game's design principles of realism. Maybe this was a technical limitation, but I find it hard to believe that there was no solution that could have been implemented to address this. The combat is passable, but certainly riddled with questionable design decisions. Outside of the physics puzzles, there are some other ones which involve searching for information contained on whiteboards or signage, but these are all fairly pedestrian by puzzling standards. Despite a gameplay experience that often spends more time frustrating the player as opposed to challenging them, objectively speaking, the game's presentation is actually very strong. There were several good-looking games released in 1998, with Unreal and its debut of the Unreal Engine a particular standout. However, even Unreal can't reach the lofty standards set by Trespasser, with it featuring enormous environments with dense assets like trees and other items littering its vistas. Ground detail as well is a very substantial uplift from other contemporary titles, with a far more randomized pattern on the jungle floor as opposed to a set of tiles reused over and over. Even the skyboxes are well detailed to help sell the idea that you really are on a tropical island. The only thing missing here in any real form is weather effects, and look, I know I'm probably asking too much from a technology perspective, especially considering the already very substantial hardware requirements, but I would have been really interested to see how the developers handled it. Menu systems are all fairly basic, but get their points across well, as does the relatively simple save and load system, which can be triggered at any time. In my entire playthrough, I never encountered any crashes, and performance was obviously not an issue on modern hardware. Sound design is good, with the game opting for more of an ambient soundtrack of the sounds of the jungle for the majority of the adventure, punctuated by the player's movement and interaction with the environment. Voice acting is of a high standard, and despite there not being a lot of dialogue in the game, when it does happen, it is used to good effect.
In the jungle, the forest, and the mountain, 3 raptor tribes staked out territory. Albertosaurs and 7 T-Rex chose their dominions.
The only criticism I have around sound is that at certain points the ambient sound will transition to a short orchestral score, often accompanied by something interesting happening in the environment. Only the mixing for this seems really off. It's like someone had 15 minutes of orchestral music and just randomly cut and pasted across parts of the game. Take a listen. Now, if Trespasser was released as a tech demo, it would have been hailed as revolutionary. Unfortunately, it was released and sold as a finished game, something that at times I struggled to even see the resemblance to. Without a doubt, there are some impressive parts of Trespasser, and likewise, the influence in games which released after it are all very apparent. However, as a standalone game, Trespasser feels like a haphazard collection of ideas without any thought or integration as to how these ideas actually function together. There's no bad ideas here, but there's certainly bad integration, something which is essential to making a game that people will actually enjoy playing. If you are an absolute die-hard Jurassic Park fan, as in you own the movies, the books, the comics, the action figures and so on, and you want to experience everything there is to experience Jurassic Park-wise, then Trespasser could be of interest to you. For everyone else though, it's a very tough recommendation in light of so many other titles which built on its technology and delivered a far more enjoyable game. So to conclude this video, I will say, after careful consideration, I've decided not to endorse your game. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.